President-elect Donald Trump announces key nominees as he prepares to transition into the White House. In a major shift in Middle East politics, Bashar Al-Assad's regime in Syria has fallen. What are the implications? The French cabinet fails a vote of confidence. Germans prepare to go to the polls. What is needed to win World War III by proxy? Welcome to Inside Israel News, your home for American conservative commentary on international affairs and thorough and unbiased analysis of Israeli news, politics, and current events in the Middle East. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. This is Inside Israel News. I'm your host, Isaac Kite. Welcome back, Insiders. It has been quite a couple of weeks here. Wish I was getting episodes out more often. I've been very busy, and it's a rough time of year. So just be patient with me. As always, your gregarious Vulcan, your prophet of things to come, your shadow president, your mad genius. I am yours truly, here to bring you all the things going on in the world so you can know what's going on and what's likely to happen. Lots of predictions made here that turn out to be completely accurate. Had the presidential election just about nailed, and so on and so forth. So within certain boundaries. Anyhow, so this show is going to be a fun one. I'm going to try to keep the American politics section short. I'll do a little analysis, talk a little bit about what's going on, and some interesting thoughts on the current situation here, and then. The Israeli news, oh my God, I mean, the whole ceasefire with Hezbollah, a lot of things going on in geopolitics in the Middle East, so I'll go into some of that. And then after that, on to international news. There's so many things. Coup, martial law in North Korea, the French government's collapsed. Germans are getting ready for just all the things. Lots of things going on. Lots of change in the air. It's going to be interesting to see how things go down. So, going from there. Anyhow, in terms of entertainment news, just real quick, a couple of things. There's a show on Netflix. I got Netflix back. I don't keep Netflix for very long usually, but I catch up on the series that I like from time to time there and then end my subscription. But I wanted to watch the boxing match that turned out to be pretty boring, right? So I got back on. But I like some of the shows they have. Like I said, Vikings Valhalla, The Last Kingdom. They're silly and dramatized, this kind of thing. But these are fun period, histories, if you will, or historical fiction based on, things that actually happened in Europe in that time. And I rather enjoy it because I think they have a lot of fun with those things. So I enjoy those things. One of the shows they have there is The King. And this is really great. Timothée Chalamet playing King Henry of Henry V fame. Now, Henry V is one of my truly one of my favorite Shakespearean plays. I love everything about it, Yeah. It's so much fun. He has a lot of there's a lot of good comedy in it, and this kind of thing, and lots of action, and it's kind of a swashbuckling Shakespeare, if ever there was one, and raises some interesting points, in his nakedness, is he not but a man? Right, and speaking of the king. So these kinds of fun things. And, of course, the infamous line that I love so much, once more into the breach, dear friends, else wallop England with our dead. So that's good stuff. There is a movie that kind of goes along the lines of the latter Henry IV, like kind of Henry IV Part 2. It's called Falstaff. It's one of these old movies from the 60s. Great medieval battle scenes. It's a lot of fun. And you get the whole thing where you have, our young master the future Henry, running around with Falstaff and you know being silly, right? It's kind of an interesting play. Anyway, the movie version of it is very good. You know, I mean, have we not heard the chimes at midnight, Sir John? Yes, yes, we have heard the chimes. Good stuff. So in this movie with Chalamet, they took basically that Henry IV era and the Henry V story and put them into one show. And sadly, they lost all the Shakespearean stuff that was so much fun if it were back in the Shakespearean language, so accurate, you know, and this kind of good stuff. But I mean, it's more accessible to people if you modernize the language. I don't know. I'm a language geek and a little bit of a snob when it comes to these kinds of things because, you know, I'm fond of that older version of English. It's a lot of fun. And I'm fond of my Shakespeare. Anyway, very fun movie. Do highly recommend it. In this version, of course, unlike Shakespeare, Falstaff is not played so much as a fool. He gets a little bit better. Let's just say he's a better outing in this film than Falstaff usually gets, and the characters are more rich. You know, young Master Percy gets you know, good screen time. I mean, it's a fun show. It was a good time and good medieval combat. One of the things that always frustrates me about how medieval combat is portrayed, it's like, I know you want to have quick action, and we like martial arts and that kind of stuff today, but we're talking about knights who are wearing, you know, hundreds of pounds of armor, picking up these huge broadswords. I mean, it would look like a slow motion battle to us today, people swinging these swords around and this kind of thing, because it's not, you know, Jedi Knights, you know, swinging and jumping around. It's, you know, these guys riding on horseback, you know, with a lot of armor and a lot of weight. And no matter how big a man you are, like, it takes a lot of strength and a lot of energy to move this stuff. So, you know, especially when it's wet, right, as it was at Agincourt. So this is a fun thing. Good show, recommend it. And if you like historical adventures and that kind of thing, and if also, you know, if you're fond of Ayn Rand, as I am, you know, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged just goes on forever, unfortunately. There's a lot of places where I think she could have shortened this or shortened that, but anyway, if you like that type of thing, I highly recommend Good Intentions and Animal Lab, among other works, by Bob Zeidman, a friend of mine who, longtime supporter of Israel and Republican, good guy all around. And he writes stories. You know, we need more art that, you know, reflects the free market views and unwoke ideas and what it's like to be a normal person. And Bob lives in California, or lived in California for a good long time, as did I. And when you're surrounded by, you know, the nutters, it's nice to have entertainment that you can read by sane, normal people that, you know, describes a better world, if you will, or, you know, better ideas. You know, with Good Intentions, we've taken wokeness to the logical conclusion, and we live in this world where trans fat is a controlled substance, and, you know, freedom fighters, people who believe in capitalism, have to work underground, you know, and legal immigrants are treated, you know, persecuted, while illegal immigrants are celebrated, this kind of stuff. So fun story, but it's very similar to the Ayn Rand thing. It's like you have stories where, you know, you get these ideas out and, you know, you feel less alone, but also fun stories, a little bit of action adventure. And Animal Lab is kind of an update on, you know, the great Animal Farm, or, you know, when you look at Orwell and what, you know, the point he was trying to make in Animal Farm, you know, the Animal Lab is kind of a similar kind of thing. So, Good Intentions, Animal Lab, Bob Zeidman, check them out. All right. So that's entertainment. It is good to see that there is still some entertainment out there that is worth watching, because everything's gotten so damn woke. It's really hard to find anything worth watching anymore. Heck, the other night, you know, I watched with my kids the old Transformers cartoon from the 80s. I mean, it was so far, you know, things have gotten so bad. It's like, you know, entertainment, you know, I have to go with what I can trust. You know what I mean? There's lots of weird stuff out there, you know, woke nonsense. Okay. American politics. So, the presidential election is over. President-elect Trump is beginning the transition. Favorability is up for he and Vance. There's a lot of people who are supporting their policies. Overwhelming support for things like the deportation of illegals. Even Mayor Adams in New York and Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, are getting it on board, getting ready to support this. I mean, they're overwhelmed with people. I mean, we're not talking about 5 people across the border, what should we do with them? We're talking about 10, 13 million people, right? And they're crowding the streets and they're in, shelters and this kind of thing. And the city of New York is struggling to take care of them, right? And not to mention all the horrors going on at the border, people drowning to death, of coyotes abusing people down there as they sneak people across. And, anyway, Ted Cruz talks about that on The Verdict more, and I'll be mentioning The Verdict a little later in the podcast in the international section, because Ted Cruz did just have a really great interview with Victoria Coates, and I think that's worth talking about. So, if you get a chance, if you're a podcast aficionado, as I am, go check out The Verdict, which is a great show, and a longtime fan of Ted Cruz. Congratulations to Senator Cruz on his reelection. It was as easy as I thought it would be. It's one of those things that you just couldn't take for granted. He had to work for it, and he did, but, it came out well. All right. So Trump's transition is generally going well. Things are kind of headed on the right track. There's been some political football with Ukraine, which I'll talk about in the international section. That's something that's, disconcerting. Right there, and a little bit of back and forth on that. But for the most part, the attention with Trump has stayed focused on two. So Ukraine is one vein. There are two others. DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk. That's been one area that everyone's talked about. That is a fun one. And on top of that, the third vein, if you will, that's got everyone's attention, of course, is his cabinet picks. Well, thank God, Matt Gaetz dropped out of the running for AG. So since he's resigned from the House and dropped out, Matt Gaetz can go away. And as they say in Canada, where I was recently working, they can F right off. He is gone. I am not going to miss that guy. Beijing Matt Gaetz, who did delayed the aid bill for 6 months, that did nothing but help Xi Jinping, Ali Khamenei, and Vladimir Putin at the expense of the American people, our allies, and our interests. Basically, Gaetz was acting as a foreign agent. He is gone. Good riddance. Auf Wiedersehen. Don't come back. Adieu. Goodbye. So I'll do my best not to mention him again, since he's not someone who's relevant. And the next pick that Trump chose for Attorney General, another Florida attorney, going to be a really great pick there. There's also been some back and forth about Pete Hegseth. Now Trump has been floating the idea of maybe picking Ron DeSantis to be SecDef. I would have preferred Mike Pompeo myself, but that was what I was hoping for. But Trump wants an outsider and he wants a loyalist. That's Hegseth. But, Hegseth is, he's a good public speaker and presenter. He's a good influencer. Has experience with the National Guard, veterans issues, and that kind of thing. He's done a lot of great stuff. He'd be a great deputy defense secretary. You know what I mean? He'd be a great number 2, right? I just don't see him as SecDef. Personally, I think there are better options out there. Now, a guy like Ron DeSantis, not only is he a veteran and he has varied experience in his background, he's also been governor of Florida. He knows what it's like to run a large government agency, right? Now, Hegseth has experience in the military, and if I was in the military too. When you're in the military, you get experience with a large government agency, but running it is a complicated thing. Ron DeSantis also has experience in Congress, and the SecDef has a really important role in going to Congress and asking for the things the military needs. And a lot of that's going to have to change. There's going to be a lot of horse trading because it's like we're building all these expensive aircraft carriers that we haven't needed for a long time. I mean, we could have, not built the entire Ford class aircraft carrier. We got the Ford out, the John F. Kennedy is about to be commissioned, and the Enterprise is on its way. And then they've got the Doris Miller and one more as yet unnamed. So that's 5 of these, $13 billion aircraft carriers that cost, billions of dollars to operate and keep in working condition. And they're just not as functional or as useful as the number of, one-way drones that we could, with that money, with $13 billion, we could build enough of these, like these Iranian Shahed drones, these suicide drones or kamikaze drones, as they call them, one-way drone, right? We could launch 100,000 of these drones, low-flying, dumb, cheap drones from Taiwan if China started something and cause all kinds of consternation behind the lines, taking out infrastructure, power infrastructure, missile depots, weapons, airplanes, runways, disabling military command and control. I mean, we could cause all kinds of consternation, right? But, $13 billion aircraft carrier with, these, multi-million dollars worth of F-35s on them, just not as functional, not as useful. And we can do more with missiles now. Bombers can drop anti-ship missiles. We've talked about, dropping pallets of anti-ship missiles from cargo planes. I mean, we have lots of delivery systems already that can bring to a war zone the things we need. But we just have to be able to, use these things. Anyway, there's a lot of restraints. So having someone who has experience being in Congress and knows how to talk to Congress and could go testify before committee or at least reach out to members of Congress and has some idea how that process works, I think would be better. So personally, I really think I like Ron DeSantis, and I've been a fan of his for some time. Versus Donald Trump, I didn't see it. I mean, I wasn't one of those people who went over to Ron DeSantis, but I have a really, really good friend, Ed, you know who you are, who is a big DeSantis fan, so he'd like that. I still say Mike Pompeo would be better. I'll just give that one last thing. Of course, Mike Pompeo is from Kansas and is in Kansas, I should say, and he's our home guy, right? Anyway. So we'll see what happens. But those are some interesting thoughts there. Kash Patel for FBI director. I mean, Trump has just picked a lot of people to shake things up, right? Really shake up the administration. In terms of the population, I mean, I just want to say real quick. I mean, so Joe Biden has pardoned his son Hunter. This is one of those things that, on the one hand, like it's obvious corruption. My friend Kenny White wrote on Political Vanguard. If you go there, look at the contributors section. Kenny White wrote a great article about the just in righteous indignation at this. And Kenny's right. I mean, this is so ridiculous, right? This is two-tier justice, right? On the one hand. On the other hand, the only reason anyone was going after Hunter Biden or anyone cares about this guy who's, had this bad life, is a loser, have some compassion. But, I mean, the guy has done some pretty sick things. The only reason anyone cares about him is because they want to go after Biden. Well, Biden didn't get to run for re-election. He's on his way out. January 20th is coming up very quickly, and we will have a new president. Personally, I want them all to go away. I know people have been talking, we got to prosecute this, prosecute that. We knew they were corrupt before they were elected, before Joe was elected. I just want them to go away. Like as of January 21st, my policy is I never want to hear the name Biden ever again. Like it's just disappear, go away. Shoo, be gone with you. Just be gone, right? So anyway, so I suppose that would be one positive there. On the other hand, it's like the president gets to pardon his son. And, if my son got into some trouble, first of all, I would hope I raised my son better than to get into trouble. But if my son should get into the same kind of trouble, I can't pardon him. You know what I mean? I can't make that kind of stuff happen, you see? So, that's just not fair to everyone else. So that's one of those things. Now, the framers gave the power of pardon and clemency to the presidency and the staying of execution, commutation of federal sentences. And when I say federal, it's a very important thing. These are crimes against the United States that the president can pardon for. So President Biden couldn't pardon someone for crimes against the state of New York, right? So if New York is prosecuting Donald Trump for state crimes, no one, the president can't pardon. Now, the governor of New York could, right? So there's that kind of thing. In any case, but the framers gave those powers to the president unchecked, right? It doesn't need to be approved by Congress or the House, the Senate, nothing. Nobody reviews those. And I don't know about clemency because, like every president, the family of Benedict Arnold requests clemency, and it just can't be given. He's a turncoat. He's a traitor. He turned on his country when his country needed him most. He ran away and joined the British. Right? He turned on his people. So no, he doesn't get clemency. And I just don't like the idea that the president can theoretically give that without the approval of Congress. I think that might be something we might in the future look to amend the Constitution when there's a good opportunity, when things aren't so contentious, to do some little minor sort of technical amendments. That might be a valuable thing. But with the power of pardon, they wanted the president to have that power and unchecked. And it's like, no, it's being abused here, and the framers would definitely agree that this is an abuse. But, for example, when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, that was a brilliant use of the pardon power. The country was hurting. There was turmoil and chaos, and, we needed to move on. And so Gerald Ford allowed people to move on with that pardon. His big mistake, of course, was running for re-election when it should have been Ronald Reagan. Now, I'm a big strategy guy. I just wanted to drop a comment here, like, well, if Nixon had been a little bit smarter and a little less, he had, his list of enemies and people he didn't like and all this kind of thing. He didn't get on with a lot of people. Just very rough personality. But if Nixon had been a little bit more strategic in his thinking and less personal, he would have realized that Ronald Reagan would make the ultimate running mate for the 1968 election. He would shore up conservatives and people on the right and the anti-communists, and he'd have a very strong support from the right on those issues with Ronald Reagan on the ticket. But also, as president, nobody on the left would have wanted to see Nixon removed from office so that Ronald Reagan would become president. You know what I mean? Like they would never have wanted Reagan to become president. So I think Nixon would probably have served out his second term if he'd picked Nixon, and then if Nixon had picked Reagan, and then Reagan would have succeeded him probably in 76. So, but unfortunately, as we saw, that's another great thing. The Angel Studios movie of Ronald Reagan, I got to watch that a couple weeks ago. Finally made the time. Beautiful movie, great movie. Backing up to entertainment a little bit. It was tearful, and I just have to say with that movie, when they got to the scene where tear down the wall, they did a great job putting that together. As a kid, I remember hearing about that speech on the news and wondering what it was all about. But a few years later, watching the Berlin Wall come down was just huge. It was a huge impact on my life and everyone's lives. I mean, we thought the Cold War would go on forever, and seeing them tear down that damnable wall in 1989 was just beautiful. It's like, finally, this nonsense has come to an end. And a couple of years after that, no more Soviet Union. Ex-nay to the Sovietsky Soyuz. All right. So anyway. Back to the cabinet and transition. So Trump's putting together a team, and he's picked the people that he's going to pick, and that's going to work out. We'll see how it all goes. So generally speaking, people are pretty positive about it, and Trump's kept his coalition together. A few people have gotten a little miffed about this or that, but whatever. Nobody's happy. There's always somebody who's not happy, but for the most part, there's overwhelming popular support. And we're going to see some serious reforms coming, hopefully. I wanted to take a minute really quickly to talk about the election process real quick, because it just, if I don't talk about it now, I'll forget, and I'll talk about it some other time when it's not relevant. A couple of interesting analysis thoughts in here too, right? So we've talked about how we elect the president a lot in this country over the last 70 years or so. There was the Keating Amendment back in the 60s talking about creating a direct presidential election with a runoff, right? As I've noted, direct election of the president would require uniform election laws, right? So the people voting for the office of the presidency, especially, those laws would have to be the same everywhere. So you couldn't have ballot harvesting in California, but it's illegal in Texas, ID required in Texas, but no ID required in California. That wouldn't be allowed. You would have to have one law for the whole country. If that had been the case, who knows how this would have. But anyway, if we had direct election, right? So Trump has earned more votes than anyone else, so he has won the plurality. But recently, as the last of the votes have been counted, it's like, come on, California, it's been a month. Finish counting the votes already. I mean, this is just asinine and utterly ridiculous. We need to have results on election night. And these states that just keep counting, Arizona and Nevada were too long. For one thing, and California has just been, they've gone beyond ridiculous. They've gone to ludicrous. They've gone to plaid. It's, we're in dark helmet territory here, my friends. So anyway, this is ridiculous. Anyway, so we're finally getting close to pretty solidly close to final election results on that, and that has Trump down just under 50%, and like painfully close, right? It's like 49.9%. So if we were having a direct election like that, then there would probably be a runoff. However, I would just like to note that if we had a direct election with national election laws, then when RFK Jr. took himself off the ballot, he would have been off the ballot everywhere. And some, 750,000 people voted for for RFK Jr. So if he has that margin, if he hadn't been on the ballot, and even half those people had voted for Trump, Trump would have a majority now. So, probably Trump would have won this one outright, even with it. But, if there were a runoff, he'd likely win as well. So I really quickly want to, this is where the analysis part kicks in, talk a little bit about left bloc, right bloc. This is a concept we use in European and foreign politics that I really love. And they do it because when you have a proportional system and you vote for political parties, you can have several political parties on the right and several on the left, right? And so how do you determine kind of who won the election? Maybe the largest left-wing party gets the most votes, but maybe there are 7 parties on the right and collectively they have more votes than the left, right? And so there's this concept of right bloc, left bloc, the bloc of parties and, the people who voted in that general direction. So let's talk about the concept, right? So obviously Donald Trump, right. Kamala Harris left. Well, Jill Stein is left, and she has, at this point, about 780,000 votes. Quick aside about that, I was going to talk about this in the last episode, but so much time going on. We heard all this stuff about how people were going to vote for Jill Stein because, Kamala was supporting genocide in Gaza. Oh my God, it's horrible. Population of Gaza has grown 2% in the last year, but, there's a genocide there. I don't know, it's kind of a basic thing, genocide involves the population going down, like decreasing, like there were, 13 million Jews in Europe before the Holocaust and 7 million Jews afterwards. That means that population went down, right? It doesn't go up. Anyway, basic stuff, I know, We can do math. We have the power of math. We don't believe lies over here, right? Anyway, all this stuff about, Kamala was supporting genocide and Trump was Hitler and all this kind of thing. So there were all these people who are saying, we're gonna vote for Jill Stein and it's going to sabotage Kamala Harris. And the Democrats were so worried about this that they're running around running ads in Michigan about how tough Kamala is on Israel while they were running ads, trying to get Jews to vote for Kamala in Pennsylvania with all this, pro-Israel stuff. I mean, yeah. Anyway, so they were running around, just beside themselves about how, they needed to get the votes of these people. And we have, fewer than 800,000 people voting for Jill Stein out of, almost 155 million votes. anti-Semitism lost this race. I'm saying, there are most of those people, most of those almost 800,000 people, it's like 780,000 people, most of those people are greenies. They're people who would vote green anyway. They're the usual nutters who vote that way. And I say that comically and sardonically. Like you have a right to have their opinion, just like libertarians have the right to have their opinion. Okay, so people have a right to have an opinion that differs from mine. I'm just being funny with them a little bit. But, those are people who would have voted green. So the whole, Kamala running around, oh, God, we've got to get the anti-Israel vote. And AOC out there saying that, the Democrats are going to lose support because they were being too pro-Israel. No, that agenda lost. Okay, so Jill Stein has that number of votes. And then we have, RFK got 750,000 votes. Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate, 640,000 votes about. And then other candidates had almost 400,000 votes, like 389,000 votes for other people. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to be very generous to the left. I'm going to take all the other candidates, even though some of them are right-wing people. I'm going to put all of those with Jill Stein together, right? And we'll call that 1.1 million people, right? And then we'll add that to at this point, Kamala Harris is 74.9 million votes. So, that's going to put her at just about 76 million. Okay? So we've been very kind. We've given her a bunch of votes. But those 400,000 votes don't count for much. So now, RFK Jr. endorsed Donald Trump. So even though he's kind of a lefty, we're going to call him right bloc. I think that's safe to say. So we'll count his voters and add those to Trump along with the 640,000 who voted for Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate. So that's about 1.4 million votes. Okay, well, Trump's already ahead. So you see where I'm going with this, right? So she gets, Trump's at 77.2 million. She's at 74.9. So if we do this left block, right block thing and we include all these other votes, right, then we have Trump up at, 78.6, and she goes up to, 76.1. Trump's still there. And that's, 50.8% for Trump at that point. 50.8% right block is what I'm trying to say. So it's pretty clear. If we had the Keating Amendment, Trump would have won the popular vote in a runoff at the very least. And probably he would have won this round if RFK hadn't been on the ballot. Trump probably would have gotten at least 300,000 or 400,000 more votes, and he'd have 50.1 at least. Okay, so that's election issue number one. Number two, that if you've been listening, I'm very fond of the district system, which is used in Nebraska and Maine, where, the two electoral votes in the state that represent the senators are, done winner takes all by state, but then each congressional district chooses its own elector. Basically, each congressional district votes for their own candidate for president, which is why Maine's 2nd District, rural Maine, votes for Trump, and Nebraska's 2nd District, the district around Omaha, voted for Harris, votes Democrat, right? Those two states trade off, basically, and it doesn't make a big difference in the way the elections. But imagine if every state had that. What would that look like? Well, I'm going to tell you because I really think that would be a better way to hold our elections. So I want to take a minute. But it also draws out more interesting facts about the election that I want to talk about and kind of get a little more in depth with. So we look at the electoral map, right? You have, I guess I should say first off the bat, like District of Columbia, Delaware, Wyoming, Alaska. Nothing would change in those states because they all have 3 electoral votes. Right. So, Maine has 2 members of Congress, 2 House of Representatives members. So they have 4 electoral votes, 2 for their senators, 2 representatives. And that way they can split to have that one more vote. But if they only had 3, you have 1 representative, then it's the same thing. It's still a statewide vote. So in Alaska, where they have 2 senators and 1 representative, their statewide vote, it's still going to be winner takes all anyway. Okay, so those jurisdictions wouldn't change. But, for the rest of the country where states have more than 1 representative, there's the possibility that one of those votes could go to the other candidate for president, which would encourage candidates to campaign in more places. At this point, we had 7 battleground states, and those states got a lot of attention, especially in the Rust Belt and Arizona and Georgia, right? North Carolina is pretty much the Harris campaign pulled ads out of there at the last minute. They knew they weren't going to win in North Carolina, so they stopped trying. And as I said, Nevada was strategically irrelevant, right? Trump was going to have to win, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and one of the Rust Belt states, with being Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. One of those in order to win, right? Nevada wasn't going to do the trick, and it really wasn't going to be relevant. So anyway, all that. Okay, so if we had the district system, if representative districts could choose their own electors across the country, how would the election look? Let's see. So Trump won 30 states, and Harris won 20 states, and the District of Columbia, right? So that's 21 jurisdictions, we'll say. All right, so if we look at it there, then Trump starts off with 60 electoral votes from that, and she has 43, right? So we're already seeing Trump going up in the margin here in terms of the Electoral College. Now, the GOP won 220 congressional seats, House seats, and Trump won in every one of those districts. Okay, he won more than that. Hold on, but just using that number. Okay, so we take 220, we add 60 to it, that's 280. As you're gathering already, 280 is more than the 270 needed to win. So right there, Trump would win. But he also won in many congressional districts there where the Democrat won the House seat. So he could have won, won at least 10 seats more, possibly as many as 12 or 13. So we're talking about if that election system had been used, Trump would have had somewhere between 290 and 300 electoral votes. Pretty close to the way it turned out, 312 with winner takes all. But that's an interesting way to do elections. And if that had been the case, there'd be 7 states, okay, we still have the 7 battleground states that you'd want to get those electoral votes if you can get them, but the race really would have come down to 50 or 55 congressional seats where the race was competitive. And that would have seen Trump campaigning in, Eastern California and in upstate New York. It would have seen Kamala going to the suburbs of Dallas and, to Austin, go to Miami. There would be a much broader area of the country that you would have to campaign in, right? So it's just a thought. But unfortunately, in order to make that work, every state would have to adopt it at once. So maybe that's something we could push in the SAVE Act. Let's try it in 2028. Let's try the district system. Encourage all the states to adopt it. And then when, most of the states have adopted it, especially all of the big states, then we could go. We wouldn't want one side to adopt it. Like if the Democrats adopted it, then the Republicans would win all the elections. And, so if it was all blue states, if all red states adopted it, then the Democrats would win all the, so you'd have to do it everywhere at once. Anyway, that was just an interesting thought. But it draws out the point, lastly, that I talked about in the last episode about among the median voters, these split ballot voters, right? These people who voted for Trump and then voted Democrat down ticket. AOC commented on this, that she saw that in her congressional district, Trump had almost as many votes as she had, meaning that, and since she won her congressional district, that means that there were people who voted for AOC and also voted for Trump, which has terrified her. Funny thing, her pronouns have vanished from her profile since then, and anyway. So that's an interesting point. And that was the point I was making last time. The GOP needs to gather in those people. Those people are why the GOP didn't gain 2 or 3 more Senate seats and didn't gain in the House. Right now, it's looking like the GOP is going to come out with 220 in the House, which is exactly the same number that the Republicans had going into the race. That's a rarity. Usually when a party wins the presidential race, they tend to gain in the House of Representatives. Now, with that, the Democrats flipped a lot of Republican seats in blue states. And, kind of given the mood and the direction of the country, I do kind of have to ask, since a lot of these, especially in California, were kind of late, last minute, votes that were counted, 3 weeks later. We do have to wonder if voter ID had been required and if the election process were a little more secure, would those seats have turned over? Michelle Steele and John Duarte, I think they'd probably be reelected right now. Okay, so We'll see. We need to get the SAVE Act passed. We need to require states to, clean up their election processes and get voter ID in every state. And then we'll see how the 2026 election goes, and 2028 after that. Quick little aside, the Census Bureau, this is just heartrending. So the House of Representatives is conducting an investigation into the Census Bureau because they have caught them overcounting. In 2020, they overcounted blue states' population significantly, like in some cases by 5%, and undercounted red state populations by several percentage points, including undercounting Texas population by 2%. That's not an accident. If it had been random, if it had been Illinois, Texas, New York, and Florida, I could maybe call it, it was an error and maybe, it wasn't deliberate. That was pretty deliberate. That threw the Electoral College and the House of Representatives by keeping a number of congressional districts in blue states. Like California should be down 2 more seats in the House of Representatives, right? They should have 51 instead of 53. And that would mean that California would have 53, not 55 electoral votes, right? And Texas would have more. Florida would have more. Just like I was talking about in the last episode, if you look at the election map in 2032, after the 2030 census, we already know that Trump could have won this race if he'd lost all 3 of the Rust Belt states based on the 2030 map, because people have migrated in large numbers to red states since 2020. But even in 2020, there was an undercounting, a deliberate undercounting of red states and overcounting of blue states. And the House is investigating this. I'm wondering and kind of hoping that the House of Representatives will rectify this midterm, right? Like, we don't actually have to wait till 2031 to reapportion the House of Representatives, right? The House could conduct this investigation, and that could lead to the political will next year to pass a bill from the House and hopefully from the Senate, and the president will sign it, reapportioning congressional districts for the 2026 election, right? And saying that, we're going to correct this error, and we're going to get those districts to the states that they should have been in since 2020, right? This has caused an effect on the 2024 presidential election. So you just imagine, Trump won 312 electoral votes. Should he have won 320? Right? Should more electoral votes have been moved to red states that he won, right, and away from blue states whose population has declined relative to the rest? I mean, it's infuriating, my friends. The constant corruption and the just the left cheats so much. So I really think the Congress should rectify this, right? And then we'll see, in 2026, between voter ID requirement and the shifting to red states of congressional districts, probably some Republican gains in Congress. All right. So, in the future, I'm going to talk about a few reforms that I think could be made. I've written some ideas down on Policies for the People, which is available. That's one of RFK's sites that, and there's lots of interesting discussions that go on there, policiesforthepeople.com. You can go there and pitch your ideas, and it can be as simple as a one-line thing. I think we should require voter ID. You're going to find a lot of people that agree. And me being, your gregarious Vulcan, who never shuts up. I've written some long and in-depth, convoluted ideas about how to change the budget process and how to consolidate all of the 70-odd means-tested social welfare programs into one, because, there's a lot of duplicate bureaucracy there. And if we had one program, then we could reform it, right? And get a lot of people off of welfare and back into the workforce. And, that kind of thing. Anyway, so some stuff that I've written about. And also, we have all these federal departments. We could get rid of all these departments and consolidate them into one, keeping those agencies and bureaus, slimming them down, that we think are important, and getting rid of a bunch of others. I mean, obviously we'll have defense, treasury, state, and all those. But like, we don't need a Department of Agriculture, Interior, Housing and Human Health and Human Housing and Urban Development, Energy, Commerce, blah, 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 Labor. You know, you get 10,000 anyway. We get all of these departments. Well, we could have one that's the Department of Interior, Labor, Energy, Commerce, and all of these, getting rid of most of the stuff from those agencies and keeping only the things we want, like Bureau of Labor Statistics collects valuable data about our workforce and labor needs and all of that kind of thing. Department of Commerce collects economic data. There are bureaus and agencies there that could be useful. Slimmed down, granted, you don't need that many bean counters, but they could be useful. But they don't have to have, we don't need a Department of Labor just so we can keep track of labor statistics, my friends. Okay, we could have a Department of Federal Administration that is a broad general department that could have the Bureau of Labor the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the the various programs of the Department of Agriculture that we want to keep, and, Bureau of Land Management and Bureau of Indian Affairs. You know what I'm saying? I mean, any of these agencies we think we want to keep could just be in one big department. Interesting kind of thought there. What if we just decided that the vice president was automatically going to be the Secretary of Department of Federal Administration? Give the broad role in domestic affairs. Anyway, with that, I'm going to move on to the Israeli news, and I've pitched you some interesting thoughts here. So we'll reconvene after the break and talk about events in the Middle East. Visit the Inside Israel News store on Etsy to get your swag and support the show at the same time. You can get the Promised Land shirt or the Now You're Messing with the Son of a Mensch shirt or other interesting swag, phone cases, and such at the store. Go to Etsy, look up Inside Israel News, or you can go to the website, insideisrael.news, and click on the image of the store, of the items for sale. Get your swag and show your support for Israel today. My friends, it is unbelievable. It is incomprehensible, inconceivable. It is absolutely insane. It is huge. I can't even tell you how huge this is. It is so massive. The Syrian regime, the regime of Bashar Al-Assad, has fallen. It's unbelievable. I mean, the regime that came to power many years ago, after the Yom Kippur War, the Alawites, led by Hafez al-Assad, took over Syria, and they've been running the country ever since. And in 2011, during the Arab Spring, the people of Syria rose up, and the successor, Hafez's successor, his son Bashar al-Assad, has been behind this murderous regime that has murdered 250,000 people or so, including using gas on them. Just horrible. Now, with the only sort of caveat that a lot of the people who were organized to fighting against Assad were not necessarily good people. For example, Islamic State, which the U.S. pummeled when Trump came to office, and some of the groups that are taking over now. Obviously, I'm going to get into that. They were Al-Qaeda affiliated and this kind of thing. But before we get into all of that, let's just talk about the tectonic shift in regional politics. Now, this is a tremor. This is a mild earthquake in the grand scheme of geopolitics, especially because of Russia's involvement here. But with regard to the Middle East in particular, this is a massive tectonic shift. When you look at the region, this is huge because it is part of the larger disintegration of Iranian interests in the region. To get the full idea of what has happened here on the big picture, right? And I'm going to have to talk about this for the next several episodes because we're going to have to go in depth, my friends. I'm just going to scratch the surface here, but let's just talk about the big picture. Let's go back to October 6th, right? On October 6th, 2023, not 2024, but October 6th, 2023, before the horrific attack on the slaughter of the 7th. What was the situation in the Middle East, right? Iran was the most powerful country other than Israel in the Middle East, right? They had proxies in Gaza in the form of Hamas, right? A powerful proxy organization there. A very powerful organization in the form of Hezbollah up in Lebanon, which was also, along with the Russians, propping up the Syrian regime, right? They have Iranian forces in Syria, IRGC, in Syria, and also in Iraq. And then they have their allies, the Houthi rebels, right? The Houthi, they're rebels, but they're kind of the government now in that part of Yemen. They control Sana'a, the former capital, and a significant chunk of Yemen. So that was the situation. Now, Israel also faced threats from Fatah, the other Palestinian terrorist organization that controls the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria for the most part. And there are other groups in the region that are potential threats to Israel. But the main threat, of course, is Iran and all of this octopus of these tendrils, these various tentacles of proxy groups that are all over the place. All right. Fast forward to today. All right. Hamas has been devastated. They're a fraction of their former self. Most of their fighters have been killed. Their weapons have been destroyed. A lot of their tunnels have been destroyed. They're barely hanging on to 100 hostages at this point, and that's their only bargaining chip. They've been so completely defeated that they're having to torture Palestinians to make them obey Hamas, right? It's horrifying. Nobody should be subjected to this. And so now people in Gaza, now the Palestinians living in Gaza are upset at Hamas for, they're living in tents and they've been displaced from their cities. And of course, they're being tortured horrifically and mutilated by Hamas in order to remain in power, right? Now that's a bad thing. Everything was good. Everybody was celebrating and dancing in the streets on October 7th. That was all fun. That was all good. But now they're upset. Anyway, okay. So the Gaza Strip. Hamas has been devastated, okay? Then Israel went at it with Hezbollah. And I warned you guys, and I warned everyone, this was going to be a different kind of war, right? That Hezbollah was going to be tougher because they've been fighting in Syria. They are hardened soldiers, more paramilitary than terrorist, right? That they have a lot more high-tech weapons. Well, Israel kind of had an edge in there too. Everybody who was important enough to have a pager went boom. Pagers that they bought from definitely not Mossad.com. So they bought the Mossad pagers. And then the next day they used their walkie-talkies and those went boom too. So every important person in Hezbollah was either severely injured, severely maimed, or killed in those attacks. Then, Hassan Nasrallah was killed, his successor was killed, and nobody wanted to be in charge. That's a very short-term job, being the head of Hezbollah these days. Okay, and Israel went into Lebanon, and they have, blown up weapons caches, underground bunkers, the bank that had all the cash in it. They've found tunnels and fortresses along the border and destroyed them, and captured weapons caches. They've done a lot of harm to Hezbollah. Hezbollah has lost over 4,000 fighters in this battle, and their leadership was destroyed, and their organization was devastated by those attacks. Now, Israel suffered 79 losses and a number of wounded, right, in that fighting. But compared to the damage that was done, like 4,000, that is incredible. Now, there's a ceasefire negotiated through Lebanon to quiet things down. Now, of course, Hezbollah has already broken the ceasefire because different, groups have tried to attack Israeli forces in the meantime to try to make it look like they have the upper hand somehow. But those have gone very badly. Those guys have been killed before they even got close to Israeli forces. Israel is watching. Forget Big Brother. The Israelis are watching you. We have drones all over the place, surveillance. We're watching. As my chief used to say on the submarine, the likelihood that you're being watched is directly proportional to the stupidity of your actions. The dumber you act, the more likely somebody's watching your dumb arse. Okay, so Hezbollah has been devastated, and it's one of these things where and they have Ali Khamenei tweeting out that Hezbollah has won a victory, and Hezbollah had this parade of people on Vespas, excuse me, and golf carts driving around celebrating their victory, and they've had truckloads of bodies of martyrs to take to the cemetery and this kind of thing. Okay, so they're making it look like they're but Hezbollah has been devastated. How badly devastated was Hezbollah, Isaac? Well, let me tell you. They were so badly injured that they weren't able to prop up Assad's regime anymore. So now, the Assad regime is coming down. Okay. With the collapse of Syria and Iran no longer having sway there, right? I'm going to go more in depth than that in a second. That means that Iran used to have proxies in Gaza, right over the border in Lebanon, and in Syria, right on Israel's doorstep. All of those places share border with Israel, right? Now, Iran has no influence there at all. I mean, they still have Hezbollah, but I mean, they're a shadow of what they used to be. And Donald Trump's been elected president, which means that as soon as he comes to office, he's going to slap some really nasty sanctions down on Iran, and they're not going to be able to afford to rebuild Hamas or Hezbollah or any of or Iran. They don't have the resources, okay? Iran has just witnessed their proxies, their tentacles being knocked all the way back to Iraq and Yemen. Okay, that is a tectonic shift in Middle East politics. The big question hanging over since October 7th, really since the Abraham Accords were written down, and the Saudis, of course, have not signed those and normalized relations with Israel yet, but they've been talking about doing so, and they definitely don't want to give a victory to the Biden administration, so they'll be more serious about it here in 2025. So the thing the Arabs want to see, and I should mention Morocco too. It's on the other side of Africa, of course, but Morocco's normalization is important too. In any case, Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco, the Saudis, right? They want to be friendlier with Israel for their own protection. They want to see if Israel can be an effective ally against Iran. And so the big question that's been hanging out there since then is, how effective can Israel be against Iran's proxies? That question, my friends, was answered yesterday when Bashar Al-Assad jumped on a plane and flew to Moscow. He is now hanging out with Vladimir Putin, making sure that he gets a first floor apartment. You got to be careful about the windows in Russia. People just have a funny way of just falling out of third story windows at hospitals when they really can't walk. Defenestration is one of Putin's favorites, Now, I don't know, maybe I'd rather have the third story treatment. I mean, the whole, radioactive tea thing, that's a much slower, much more horrible death. So, I don't know. If I had to pick one, I'd go the Prigozhin way, shoot down my plane, then I can just, hit the earth really hard, really fast. Whew. It's not really, not so good being a friend of Putin's these days. Anyway, neither Iran nor Russia was strong enough to keep Assad in power as these rebel groups began to press against the front lines, right? And that's with all of the weapons that they have available to them. The Russians were carpet bombing, they were pounding the rebels, they were, hitting them with artillery, they were bombing them, they were anything they could get out there using their firepower, and it didn't work. So as the rebels advanced into Aleppo, into Hama, into Homs, and eventually into Damascus, as they advanced into the suburbs of Damascus, the regime realized that they were gone. And so Assad fled the country, and the military in Syria surrendered. They gave up. The guards at the prisons left, the soldiers retreated, and now those areas of Syria are now under control of the rebels. Now, there are many groups in Syria including two different Kurdish groups that the Turks are always bombing and attacking, and there's still the Alawites and what's left of the regime over along the coast where the Russian bases are. Although there's another one near Damascus that's now surrounded, and the Russians are asking for safe passage to get out of there. Considering, they've been bombing the snot out of the rebels, I don't know if these groups would be happy. Anyway, the main group that is leading this particular offensive is called HTS by that acronym. That's, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They're a formerly Al-Qaeda affiliated group, so they are Islamist. But years ago, they saw what was happening with Islamic State, and I think they did something smart for two reasons. But they moved away from Al-Qaeda and went in a more moderate direction. Now, we use this term moderate all the time. So, my friends, you know what I'm talking about. These are Al-Qaeda Islamist terrorists who decided to be less evil, slightly less evil. Right? We're not talking about, they decided that, they were all of a sudden good with social justice and started flying rainbow flags and, it's peace, love, and gay rights. I mean, no, we are not talking about rainbows and unicorns here. Okay? These guys are still Islamists. But they decided that if they toned down the Al-Qaeda, if they moved away from Al-Qaeda, toned down the Islamist part, that they could get outside support, especially from Turkey. Are Turkish-backed. Now, Turkey has interests in Syria, two very big interests. One, the country that borders them to the south is a failed state now. Right now, if you have a failed state next to you, you naturally have interests in trying to protect your borders along that failed state. And of course, they are also very concerned about the Kurds because, as we talked about before, much of eastern Turkey is Kurdish, ethnically Kurdish, since it's like the Turks did the Armenian genocide. They forced the Armenians out of the area. And now, Kurds moved into those areas in large part. And demographically speaking, Kurds have more children than Turks do. So Turkey is headed in the direction of being an ethnically Kurdish country. Anyway, there've been a lot of terrorism and a lot of trouble with the Kurds in Turkey trying to gain their independence. There should have been a Kurdistan back in 1919. Don't get me started. So many things went wrong at the end of the First World War. How many things went wrong? We had a Second World War and a Cold War. It just, the First World War just completely messed up the world, and we're still dealing with the after effects. So, with the lack of a Kurdistan, Turkey has the largest Kurdish minority, right? And then there's Kurdish minority in northern Iraq and northern and eastern Syria and in northwestern Iran as well. And that's, so they're spread out through all these countries. Well, the Turks don't want the Kurds to have independence, obviously. So they want to keep their thumb on the Kurds in Syria and Iraq and prevent them from getting out of hand. So they, backed this group to do two things. One, to keep the Kurds in check in Syria rather than having the Kurds attack over the border. I don't know that will happen, but the Turks certainly are concerned about it. And also that this group could, potentially take over Syria, and now Turkey is the broker there. So all this stuff that we're hearing from HTS about how, minorities are going to be protected, it's all about peace and love now, and, flowers and unicorns, and they're saying they're going to, that everything's going to chill out now that they're taking over, and they're going to build a new government in cooperation with everyone. It sounds really good. Most of that's rhetoric that's coming out of Ankara, not Damascus. So that is one of those things that, for better or for worse. Now, it could be a lot worse than Turkey pulling the strings because Iran could be pulling the strings, right? It's much better to have Turkey than Iran, even though I have a lot of problems with Turkey right now, myself, right? Okay. So this group has now taken over a big chunk. So if you look at Syria, it's broken up now into the Kurdish areas in the north, one Kurdish group, another Kurdish group in the northeast, in the corner of Syria, if you will. The Sunni core of the country is kind of like just south of Turkey, a little ways. There's a Kurdish zone kind of along the north, a strip of Kurds who live along northern Syria. It's mostly Sunni from there all the way down to Damascus. And the Alawites are concentrated along with Sunni populations along the coast, right? And then over to Aleppo. And then, a lot of them have also moved to Damascus because that's where the power is. So now there are all these interest groups in Syria. You have the remnants of the government, I want to call it that, but the Alawite minority, right, who still control the coast. Now, they still can fight back, right? Like the government has given up the ghost, but those people can still fight. So it would not be in the best interests of HTS, let's say, to go have a fight to the death with the Alawites and try to annihilate them, right? Better to work with them now that the regime has officially fallen. Likewise, there are these two Kurdish groups. So we have 3, 4, 5 groups that could sit down theoretically and negotiate to create a new country. They could hold elections. In a perfect world, they would elect some kind of constitutional assembly that could provide a transitional executive government and prepare a constitution for free and fair elections. In a perfect world, that would be that. And write a constitution with rights for everyone where Christians and Alawites, Sunnis, Kurds, everyone would be protected. Right? That'd be ideal. Okay. I mean, we can hope. I would really like to see something like that. I just don't have much faith that it will. All right. The results of that. The most important thing right now is Israel's response. So when the regime fell, Israel bombed the Syrian Air Force, their missile factories, chemical weapons stores, their air defenses, and destroyed the equipment that the Syrians, and also bombed, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in Syria. So now those guys are going to have to leave. They're if they're not already booking it back to Iraq, they will be soon. And obviously Hezbollah targets. So now Hezbollah has to retreat to Lebanon. They're going to be out of Syria. They're not welcome anymore. Anyway, so Iran is now out of Syria. That's the big thing there. But Israel has also destroyed all of the equipment, and now Syria is going to have to start off fresh, without an air force, without chemical weapons, without missiles, and the ability to produce them. So they can't pose much threat to Israel. Now, you'll remember that in the recent airstrikes on Iran, Israel destroyed the air defenses in Iraq and destroyed Iran's air defenses. Whatever lackluster, last-minute, cardboard and paper mache air defenses the Iranians can put together are not going to do much. And they'll be quickly brushed aside by the Israeli Air Force. So flying over the Golan Heights, which now belongs to Israel, thank you, Trump. Flying over the Golan Heights, the Israeli Air Force will meet no resistance flying from there to Tehran. They can fly there anytime they want. There are no air defenses between the Golan Heights and Tehran. Sleep restfully, sleep comfortably and deeply, Ali Khamenei. The Iranian regime should definitely be calm and chill. They have nothing to worry about. They are definitely not in check. So between Iran being blasted by Israel and being shown to be weak, and this is a combination of the effects of those bombing attacks and also the moral impact that Iran was a strong place and now they're getting bombed, so they're obviously not as strong. Right, it's like if the neighborhood bully, everybody thinks, oh, that guy's tough, you don't mess with him. And then all of a sudden somebody, knocks him down once. He takes a big chunk out of that guy's prestige. All of a sudden people are going to start standing up to him. Let alone if he pummels the guy, breaks his jaw and rearranges his face, then the bully is not going to have any stock anymore, right? And that's basically where Iran is now. So they've lost 3 proxies. They've lost their allies in the Assad regime, whom they couldn't protect. There are no air defenses between Golan and Tehran, and that's huge and that's seismic. The implications for Iran are massive, right? Now, the Iranians now have only 2 tentacles left. They have the IRGC in Iraq, and they have the Houthis in Yemen, right? And here's where the fun begins, okay? So this is another geopolitical shift, right? For some time, northern part of Somalia, called Somaliland, has been seeking recognition. They want to be independent. Somalia is a failed state, but like a lot of colonial possessions, there are multiple ethnic groups and tribal identities within it. And the northern part of Somalia, Somaliland, is one of these, and they've pulled it together. They have a government, they have a state, but the international community refuses to recognize them. There's also Puntland, which is the kind of like from the Horn halfway down the rest of the country, that is trying to pull itself together to like Somaliland. Personally, I'd say just recognize Somaliland. At least it's organized. The rest of Somalia is still a failed state. The area in the south around the Moog and that area is, they're fighting terrorists like Al-Shabaab. It's chaos. It's a disaster zone. I don't even want to go there. So if there are parts of former Somalia that could be admitted to the international community as sovereign states, why not? Right? At least then there's fewer failed states. There's less chaos. Okay, so Somaliland is looking for recognition. Well, as a Muslim country, naturally they're close to other Muslim countries like the United Arab Emirates, which has now normalized relations with Israel. So a deal was brokered that in exchange for Israeli recognition of Somaliland's claim to independence, Israel will be able to establish a base in Somaliland. My friends, there are going to be Israeli ships and Israeli planes in Somaliland, potentially. I don't know exactly how this is all going to shake out, but there are going to be Israeli forces in Somaliland, just across the Sea of Aden from Yemen, right? From our Houthi friends up there in Sana'a, right? Just beyond the Bab el-Mandab Strait, where they've been shooting at ships, right? This is a lot like, King Solomon, who built ships in the Gulf of Aqaba to protect sea trade in the Red Sea, and with Sheba, which was an Arab kingdom in southern Arabia that was also trading with what is now Ethiopia, that part of Africa. So there was a lot of trade going on at that time, and there's been a lot of piracy historically in the Red Sea. So they made a deal where at that time where the Queen of Sheba and King Shlomo would protect that trade, provide security in that region, and then they would all the trading partners would be able to trade more prosperously. And Israel prospered back then as much as did the Arabs and the Ethiopians. We know that there was a lot of wealth and a lot of trade passing around at the time. Anyway, so we're back to that. Now, this is Israel's first overseas base, or I might joke oversea, because it's kind of just on the other side of the Red Sea. Does the Gulf of Aden count as a sea? Obviously, most Israeli ships are going to have to sail from the Mediterranean Sea through the Suez, so that's overseas. Good enough. Okay, so this is Israel's first overseas base. Now, when I had my interview with Ryan Macbeth, one of the things that he brought up, and that is really important to understand, is that Israel doesn't have an offensive military. They do not have an expeditionary force, right? Israel has a defensive military that is short range. It is designed to protect Israel from threats in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, from the Golan Heights, or, in Lebanon, right? Israel is perfectly capable of projecting force on the ground into Jordan if they had to, but we have peace with Jordan, so we don't want any trouble there. Or Egypt if we had to, but again, now we have peace with Egypt, so we don't want to. Into Syria, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, and into Lebanon, which obviously Israel has already done. But Israel doesn't have the capability to manage logistics and provide the supplies necessary, and they don't have the training and the preparation to send like 3 army divisions through Syria to Baghdad, right? They don't have the ability to send expeditionary forces outside the country, right? The U.S. has that capability. France, Britain to a lesser extent. Their ground forces are meh, as Gen Z so accurately and concisely says. They're meh, right? The Russians, we thought they did, and the Chinese are trying to, but they're still a long way from it. But very few countries have a real offensive expeditionary capability. Well, this is Israel's first expeditionary capability. This is the Israeli Navy setting up a base overseas, not on the other side of the planet, granted, like the United States has naval bases all over the world, right? U.S. ships can pull into Yokosuka, Japan, and we have a base there. They can go down to Guam. They can our bombers can land at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean and fly from there into Asia. We have bases all over the place, and the use of allied bases, like Diego Garcia, for example, is a British base, but we have use of it because we're allies. The point is, we have bases all around the world. Israel has bases in Israel. Now they are going to have a base in Somaliland. Now, this is also an interesting thing about, real quick, geopolitical influence. When Jared Kushner and David Friedman went out there and made it very clear to the Arabs, if you want to be friends with the U.S., be friends with Israel, right? If we're clear about that. Israel is our ally. They are our friends. Want to be our friends? Be their friends. Then that gives Israel influence because now they are a path to the U.S. Going directly to the U.S. is very difficult because there are a lot of people begging for, help from the U.S. But having a good friend on your side. So now Somaliland not only gets, provides a base to Israel and gets recognition by Israel, but Israel's big brother, Israel's good friend, is the United States of America. If the United States were convinced to support Somaliland's independence, it would be granted. It would be recognized. It's done and over with. Donald Trump, once he's president, with the squiggle of his pen, could make Somaliland a real thing, officially, right? So getting on the good side of one of our allies is a really good way to influence that, okay? So that's huge. And again, it just shows you what we can accomplish when we think outside the box. We get around the diplomatic process. Right? Rush Limbaugh used to talk about all the time, government loves process. The diplomats, they love the peace process. It's always a process. It never accomplishes anything. That's not the point. It's a process. The whole point is that we have this big bloated bureaucracy that's just doing something. Lots of paperwork is being done, lots of work. Salaries are being paid. Elon just discovered that, something like 10% of federal employees are actually putting in 8-hour days. Most of them are not putting in 40-hour work weeks and this kind of thing and not coming to the office. Like, what a surprise. But you get my point, right? It's a process. It's designed to keep people employed and keep things busy, but it never accomplishes anything, okay? You wouldn't apply that in business, right? Nobody wants to have a process to fix your car. Go to the mechanics. Oh, well, we're replacing your alternator. It's a process. It's going to be a while. We have to talk about it. You have to discuss it in committee, figure it out. No, you just replace the darn thing, right? Okay. So it's like, if you're going to have peace talks, you have peace talks. You get the people together, you sit in a room and you say, hey, can we work something out here? It's been done, right? And famously by Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, right? Egypt and Israel sat down and made peace. Okay, so the point is, this is part of this. So now Israel is projecting force beyond its borders because Israel has its first naval base. The collapse of Syria and the retreat of Hezbollah means that, it's the devastation of Hezbollah and Hamas. Iran's proxies, their tentacles have been driven back to Iraq and Yemen. And now Israel is going to have a base where they can watch Yemen. Right? We're going to be, instead of the Iranian proxies moving out to become our neighbors, my friends, we are going to them. Now, we're going to say, hey, Houthis, guys, we're neighbors, right? It's going to be like the funny thing on YouTube, Good morning, my neighbors. Hey, F you. Yes, F you too, right? Okay, well, here we are. The Houthis are like, we hate Israel. We're going to destroy you. Yes, we're going to destroy you too. You reach out and touch our boats and we're going to reach out and touch you. Along with U.S. forces and what. Now, Israeli ships will be able to go out, Sa'ar-class frigates and, corvettes, excuse me. Not quite so powerful as a frigate, but Sa'ar-class frigates will be able to go out and help patrol the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea and protect shipping there. And anytime that they feel it's necessary, to blast the Houthis and to decrease their capabilities. So we're reaching out and touching them. And while the IRGC in Iraq is still there, and they're going to get whoever retreats out of Syria, most likely, although it's not clear how many are going to retreat. And these IRGC, these are a lot like Hezbollah, but it's like the Iranian Revolutionary Guard kind of organizes local people, local forces into these units, and they bring in some of their own people, but they're not Iranian soldiers, they're local forces for the most part, but they're led by Iran more directly than even Hezbollah is. They're retreating to Iraq, and Israel can pummel them anytime too. Now I think the next step is for Israel, the Saudis, the UAE to get together and work with the Sunnis in Iraq to create some kind of paramilitary group that can counter the IRGC. Because there's the Peshmerga and the Kurds up in the north. If the Sunnis, who are up in, Anwar and in northern Mosul, the northern part of Iraq and the western part of Iraq, which is largely Sunni, down to about Baghdad, if those people got organized, then they become a stronger interest group within Iraq against Iran. But then that means that, Iranian militias and what have you in Iraq would have to contend with the Peshmerga and with the Kurds and with these Sunnis before they could deal any harm to anyone else, right? So that would be the next step, because then that would put a thumb on them. I don't know if that's the angle they want to go with, but the next issue here is to get Iraq organized. With Syria finished, with Iran out of Syria, now the goal is to get Iran out of Iraq. And the best way to do that, to start doing that, would be to get the Sunnis organized. And also then, and perhaps Bahrain could work on this, since Bahrain is a majority Shiite country, reaching out to Iraqi Shia population and sort of slowly building up a group of people there who want Iran out. Believe it or not, even though the Shiites in Iraq were persecuted for a lot of years under Saddam Hussein and, maltreated and what have you, there is a strong sense of national identity there still. There are a lot of Shia in Iraq who do not support control of their country by Iran. They're more or less sympathetic with Iran, but they don't want Iran running them. Okay, so it's like that. So work with those groups and slowly roll back Iran's interests in Iraq, right? But if we keep Iran busy in Iraq and Yemen, that's a long way from Israel now, right? And that's the huge tectonic shift that has just taken place. A couple of quick thoughts here. BB's star is rising, having accomplished all of this. It hasn't been perfect. There's still, we still have the hostages that Hamas has. Donald Trump says to release them. He threatened the Middle East. He's going to rain hell down in the Middle East if they don't release the hostages. Now that's the way you accomplish things. Biden's in it. Don't just don't. Nobody listens to that kind of thing. And his back and forth where it's like, we support Israel, and then they're going to withhold 2,000-pound bombs. Right? When you do this kind of equivocation, when you're not completely on board, when you're not solid, all you do is encourage the terrorists to keep going, because they see that as a sign of weakness, right? That our support for Israel isn't that strong. Look, it's waning. They're weakening, right? They're giving ground. That's how they see those kinds of things. So we definitely need to stop that. Well, Donald Trump is going in, on the other hand. He's saying, you better release the hostages before I come to office, or else. And one of my friends is joking, and this is a joke, but, we've been joking about, what is Hamas going to do when the first Mardiv lands in Gaza? That's the 1st Marine Division, for those of you. If you guys, if you Hamas terrorists think that the IDF is bad, that they're hunting you down and catching you guys and blowing you guys up and whatever, the last thing you want to do is quarrel with some United States Marines. Okay? They are not the people you want to hang out with. Okay? It's not going to be fun. But while that would not happen, the point of the matter is, obviously that tells Hamas that they're not going to get any succor from Donald Trump. He's not giving them a warm shoulder to cry on. It's like, I'm gonna smack you guys down. The Israelis can, and clearly that means that the Israelis have a free hand to keep going after them. Hamas needs to surrender. And there's talk of a deal being negotiated, and I'm hearing lots of people, including family members of hostages. I talked about in the last episode, my friends, it is heartbreaking to think about those people who are, like Naama Levy, who was 19 when she was taken. And, she's still in captivity. She was the one being dragged around, that famous picture with blood all over her pants. You think about, if that's your daughter, you want her back. right? And you don't really care how you get it. That's the emotion of it. That's why hostage taking is so evil, right? That's the goal, is to tear at your heart, to rip it apart from inside, right? To shred your soul, if you will. It's an attack on you as a person. It's horrible and it's destructive. But we can't surrender. Okay, we can't give up. We cannot allow Hamas to come back. We cannot allow them to secure power again. We need to keep the pressure on. Hamas needs to surrender. Okay, unconditional surrender. Right? If Hamas wants a deal, they can release the hostages. Until then, we hunt them down. We kill them. Every single one, right? And not just for Israel, they're torturing Palestinians. I don't want you to watch the videos. Like I said, I watched the videos of October 7th. I'm not the same person. These are on a par, okay? Torturing and tormenting. It's like, I don't know if it's Hamas or Mao Zedong. Mao had a really, he loved torturing people, especially with hot wire. That was his favorite. And, he'd torture the wives of his close associates, just to, talk about crimes against the soul. He really understood terrorism, fear, how to generate fear, right? And he kept the people around him in constant terror of his narcissism. And that's the kind of thing. Well, Hamas is doing the same thing. They're terrorizing people horribly. So if there's to be a better, brighter future for the Palestinians, that needs to be sans Hamas. I know I was listening to Mad Dog Mattis, speaking of Marines. General Mattis was on a great interview recently. And he was talking about, well, we need to get a process started for a two-state solution. I know it looks bad with all this stuff. And I'm going to have to beg to differ. Mad Dog is a little more institutional than I am, I'm going to say. There's no talk of a two-state solution. It's done. It's over. What we need to talk about now is no more Hamas, is building something better in Gaza. 20 years from now, when things have changed, when Palestinians are growing their economy and living peacefully and no longer teaching their children terror, and we have a happy situation, and everyone's moved on and the racism is gone, either gone or they're no longer so racist that they want to kill everybody. I mean, there's a difference between being bigoted and being violently bigoted, I guess you could say. And neither is good, but, I don't really care if they want to be racist as long as they're not trying to kill our children, okay? But the hostages, Ariel and Kafir Bibas, little boys, little redheaded boys, Kafir Bibas is a baby. He's a toddler now. And that happened in captivity. And considering how, Aden Yerushalmi was starved to death, almost. I mean, she was killed, but she was starved half to death. And so many other hostages, the remains that we've found. I don't even want to think of what's going on with those poor kids. We want these people back, okay? So Hamas can surrender them and give them back, or their remains. That's a good start. Then we can talk about a deal. And that deal is going to involve them giving up their weapons and coming out of their holes and surrendering, right? Unconditional surrender is what we need here. Now, if they give up their weapons and, agree to give up power, right? Stop torturing Palestinians, right? If they don't have their weapons, they won't have the power to torture people and what have you. Maybe there could be a deal short of complete unconditional surrender. I mean, after all, the U.S. did allow the Emperor of Japan. We told the Japanese ahead of time that the Emperor would remain on the throne, right? That's technically a condition. We just didn't do that formally, right? That wasn't through channels. Just the Japanese said that, put out a feeler that we'd think about surrendering, but we can't, we can't let the Emperor come to any harm. And, through a statement, Truman put out, just a statement. The Japanese need not be concerned about the position of the emperor's person or his safety, right? And so they were willing to take that. The main question, of course, was really how culpable was the emperor? And while the emperor himself never really was allowed to make decisions, he was directly culpable. Anyway, so Hamas, these guys, you see my historical tangents. I keep getting off on these things. Anyway, Hamas needs to surrender, okay? That needs to happen. In Israeli politics, just briefly here, like I said, I've got so many things to go into. I really need to be recording episodes more often and get you guys some more in-depth stuff. Bibi Star is rising. He's looking better in the polls. It's not great. It's not perfect. But, it is getting better. That's what I said last year, right, was where none of the political issues matter until the war is over, right? Bibi Netanyahu, in the last election, said if he was reelected, he would make Israel a world power. Slight hyperbole. But now Israel is a regional power, and Iran's proxies have been pushed back all the way to Iraq. That's a huge victory for Israel. And it cannot be escaped that he was the one who was in power that made that happen. Okay, that is the fact. Much as, there are lots of things I don't like about FDR, but you cannot escape the fact that he led us through the war, for better or for worse, with his mistakes and all. That's being human. All right, so with that, I'm gonna stop here. All right, go on for another hour and jump into the international news. And now on to the international news. As I delve into World War III by proxy, I just want to take a moment to go back to, as you know, I love my history. The last World War, right? I recently watched Darkest Hour for the umpteenth time. Absolutely love that movie. Gary Oldman did an excellent job portraying Churchill. I think he's the best Churchill I've ever seen. A few other actors have done a good job, a good approximation, but Gary Oldman is just an incredible character actor ever since, Air Force One, which was, he was terrifying. Like you really believed he was a terrorist. He definitely made it work. But in this case, he made you believe he was Winston Churchill, Sir Winston. In any case, great movie. But one interesting thing they couldn't quite cover in the movie, he mentions it a few times, but Winston Churchill, because of the issues he'd had in the First World War and his switching parties and the things that he had done before, especially, the failure at Gallipoli, which was partly him and partly someone else. And then, of course, he had just embarrassed himself in Norway just before he became chancellor. In any case, for years before that, he'd been talking about this psychopath in Germany, this little corporal, right? This Adolf Hitler. And, he kept telling everyone, this guy's a serious threat. This guy's a serious threat. He's a serious problem. We need to build our defenses. We need to build up the Navy. We need to build up the Army and the Air Force. We need to be prepared for war. This guy is going to make trouble. For years, he'd been in Parliament saying this. And finally, he became Prime Minister in 1940 when Neville Chamberlain, of course, was ill and his policy had utterly failed. Germany had taken Denmark and Norway, and literally the day before Winston Churchill became Prime Minister, right, on May 10th, he was invited to form a government. The day before, on May 9th, 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and then France, right? We all know what happened by, the middle of June. Germany had basically taken over France. But, of course, the events of Dunkirk had happened shortly after. Anyway, I go into this all day. The point is, Churchill knew Hitler was bad. But he also hadn't seen the full catalog of Hitler's evil. Right? Today we can look back. We know about the Holocaust. In the late 30s, Jews had tried to get information out about the Holocaust, about Kristallnacht, about the things that were going on and how bad it was. No one really believed them. And some people thought no one could imagine it was as bad as it was going to get. I mean, when Charlie Chaplin made The Great Dictator, by far another one of the greatest films ever made, he made light of it, talking about how dumb the Germans were to pick on Jews. He later realized it was no laughing matter. It was really much more horrible than he thought. And he said, of course, if he had known at the time how bad things really were, he wouldn't have made the movie because it really wasn't funny. Still, he did make one of the great movies of all time. In any event, Winston Churchill didn't know about all of that. And of course, there weren't concentration camps at the time and there weren't gas chambers. That all came later. Winston Churchill knew Hitler was evil out of a sense of moral rightness and rectitude. Churchill knew what was right. He knew that Hitler represented the wrong thing, that he was psychotic and that he would pursue his interests, and he went after him. And so there we have that moment in Parliament where, the British army has just been evacuated desperately at Dunkirk, right, after a total defeat in Belgium. And, they've just brought their boys back, and Winston Churchill's giving his speech, and he says, how are we going to win? We're going to fight them. We'll fight them on the land and on the seas, on the landing grounds, with growing confidence in the air. We'll fight them in the fields and in the streets. We'll never surrender, right? Churchill understood this was an evil. He had that moral character and the intestinal fortitude to stand by it. And that couldn't have been easy. In the movie, they show how much it stressed him physically. And, those were difficult times for Churchill, for sure. How it really happened, we'll never quite know, but he was certainly stressed. Today, we find ourselves in a similar dark place, right? With regards to the Middle East, as I just talked about, the World War III by proxy is going quite well because the Israelis do have intestinal fortitude. Bibi Netanyahu and his government do understand what is right. They've stomped on Hamas. They've stepped on Hezbollah. The Syrian regime has collapsed. They've driven Iran and their proxies all the way back to Iraq and Yemen, and then they're moving on to be able to pursue them in those targets. Right? There are no air defenses between Golan and Tehran. Right? Sleep tight, Ali Khamenei, and new Israeli base coming in Somaliland. What did I just say about influence? I just saw on X a few minutes ago. Now Donald Trump has announced that he's going to recognize Somaliland's independence, right? So making friends with Israel is a way to ingratiate yourself with the United States. We take care of our friends. And Israel has been one of our closest allies. Look at how hard they fought. They've proven themselves extremely invaluable to the United States and to the Arabs and Abraham Alliance, right? So on that front, we're in really good shape. Iran's in deep trouble, all right? But Israel can't go beyond that. Israel can barely handle Iran. I mean, the Air Force can go over there and bomb Iran here and there, but Israel doesn't have an expeditionary military. They can't, take their armies through Syria and Iraq and go invade Iran. It can't work that way. And neither do the Saudis, the Emiratis, or anyone else have that capability. But they can certainly help contain Iran and defeat the proxies. So that front seems to be going well. China continues to harass Filipino fishing boats in international waters that are recognized as Filipino fishing waters. They have the right to fish there. North Korea continues to threaten South Korea, and of course they have troops fighting in Russia. So do the Houthis. Right? They have a brigade fighting against Ukraine, helping the Russians as well. But that's where things are not going so well. Right, the Russians are advancing slowly by yards here and there. It's a lot like a football game, 10 yards here, 100 yards there, right? And they're losing 700 to 1,000 men a day doing it. It's asinine. And if Ukraine had just a few more artillery rounds, if they had Germany's Taurus missiles, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. If they had the firepower, they could halt that advance, right? And they could slowly start to drive the Russians back. This isn't the first dark moment our country has faced, right? There was a day, perhaps America's darkest day. I mean, we had some dark times during the American Revolution, but perhaps America's darkest day, I think, safe to say. September 11th, no, not 2001, 1814. The British were bombarding Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor. The British Army had occupied Washington, D.C. They set the Capitol and the White House alight. They burned them down. I mean, the marble building facade remained, but all of the wooden structure inside burnt to a crisp. And James Madison and Dolly Madison had to jump into a carriage and flee. At the last minute, Dolly Madison grabbed a portrait of George Washington. That portrait is still in the White House today, and the reason it survived the War of 1812 was because Dolly Madison grabbed it on the way out. She had the presence of mind. And they went to Williamsburg to set up government in exile there from Washington, D.C., until the Capitol was rebuilt in 1819. It took some time. Anyway, that was a very dark day for America. All night, Fort McHenry was bombarded by the British fleet. Their guns were bigger, could shoot farther. Fort McHenry's cannon really couldn't reach the British fleet. There's not much they could do. And yet, as they blasted the fort refused to surrender, right? And so, sitting on a British ship nearby, Francis Scott Key, the American patriot, penned a poem. that we know as the Star-Spangled Banner. We sing the first verse, and so most people are familiar with it. There are actually 4 verses, and believe it or not, Oliver Wendell Holmes' father wrote a 5th. I've always been fond of the 4th. I'm going to read it now for your benefit, although you can look it up yourself. But to remind us of our intestinal fortitude, to remind us, as Ronald Reagan said, that we are not descended from fearful men. Right? We don't have to cower in fear. We're not afraid of the Russians. We're not afraid of the Chinese. We're not afraid of Iran or North Korea. These are just the latest bad guys. And honestly, China aside, perhaps, none of them are as bad as Hitler or Japan, right? So we can, they're weak, and if we just push back, they'll fold. Russia's on the brink. So again, just a reminder of moral fortitude. We have to fight this conflict, and we have to win. So with that, the 4th verse of the Star-Spangled Banner as a poem, before it was set to Anacreon in heaven, and the tune, it was a poem. Okay, so without further ado. Oh, thus be it ever, when freemen shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise that power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, for our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust, and the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Now is not the time to be cowardly. Now is not the time to back down. Now is not the time to run scared. We have our enemies on the brink. We can win this with just a few moves. In 6 months, World War III by proxy could be over, and Cold War II with China could begin. A Cold War II in which Russia is useless, weak, and defeated from losing its war in Ukraine, where Iran is surrounded and beaten and cowed, under deep sanctions. They may end up actually having to end their nuclear program, stop financing terror, and, find some way to be a healthier relationship with the world, or maybe the Iranian people finally be able to rise up and get rid of that awful regime in the first place. China and North Korea then can be contained, and the full force of the U.S., because Europe will be able to handle any lingering threat from Russia, the full weight of U.S. military presence can be brought to bear in Asia, where we can keep China under thumb. Okay, they can't move as long as we're able to bring everything against them. And thanks to our aid to Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, we're rebuilding our supply lines. We're rebuilding our, our logistical capabilities, our industrial capacity and supply chains, so that we can provide the weapons, the munitions to be able to do that. So we're very close. We just can't wimp out right now. And I'm a little worried with what I'm hearing from Donald Trump. Strong on every other issue. We're getting some weak backbone when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. Don't know what he's playing at. All right. But obviously, since the Russians are trying to advance, and they're bombing the snot out of Ukraine, and they're bombing civilians indiscriminately, it doesn't sound to me like Putin wants peace and wants to keep wants to negotiate to try to keep what he's got. Right? He's still trying to take over Ukraine. He's hoping they'll fold first. In the meantime, it kind of looks like Russia's going to fold first. The ruble is collapsing. Russia's economy is in deep pain. Their military spending is through the roof. How long can they sustain? We'll see. Hopefully not much longer. All right, with that, let's go into the rest of the geopolitics. That's World War III by proxy, and my main message there, we just have to have some cojones, some qui, as the French say. A pair of nuts, okay? Just takes a handful of guts, and we can win this. With Churchill's speech, I was also reminded recently watching Angel Studios, Ronald Reagan, Dennis Quaid, very, very good movie as well. It took a lot of courage to stand in front of the Brandenburg Gate and say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Everyone said not to, right? He was castigated by the press. Like everyone thought it was universally panned. It was a terrible idea. Oh, Reagan doesn't know what he's talking about, whatever. 3 years later, no more Berlin Wall. An event that it still makes me a little emotional thinking about it, because as a child, it changed our whole world. It's hard to explain to someone who wasn't there. For those of you who were, you know what I mean. One day we woke up and we were in a Cold War with missiles pointed at us and all this kind of thing. And the next day, the Berlin Wall came down. And we began to ask ourselves, is this over? By 1990, all of those Eastern European countries were free of Soviet control. And a year after that, Gorbachev resigned and there was no more Soviet Union. So anyway, all right. Politics, international politics, let's talk. So, the French cabinet has fallen. They've been voted out, failed a vote of confidence. So I've talked about before, France has a mixed presidential parliamentary system. A couple of countries do. Russia technically does, but of course they're a dictatorship, so that's all on paper. But France is real. The idea is the Assemblée Nationale elects a parliament that runs most of domestic affairs, basically. The president is directly elected to a 5-year term, just like the Assemblée Nationale, the National Assembly, right? The president kind of handles international foreign affairs and that kind of thing, the big issues, right? And works and coordinates with the cabinet. But they still function on that parliamentary principle that the ministry must be popular. It must maintain the support of a majority of the electoral body, which is the National Assembly, right? That's a parliamentary system, unlike a directly elected president who has a mandate and serves for a term and answers directly to the people. Okay. Because they have that mixed system, they really need a popular ministry. Well, the last election was inconclusive. Well, the election where Macron was reelected, the first French president to be reelected since 2002, by the way, back in 2022. But the parliamentary elections that followed were inconclusive. His party didn't win, Ensemble. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the communist populist left, didn't win, and Marine Le Pen's National Rally didn't win either. Okay. And Les Républicains, basically, they don't exist anymore. The old right. It's hard to imagine. I mean, 2007, Nicolas Sarkozy won as the Gaullist party, basically as the Republicans, right? And served a term as president, being narrowly defeated by François Hollande with the Socialistes in 2012. And now, 12 years later, his party doesn't exist anymore, right? Basically, it's gone. So as I've said last time, talking about French politics, in a very short time, they're going to have an election in 2027 at the end of Macron's term, and it's going to be the far right versus the far left, populist right versus populist left. The center party, Macron's, what used to be En Marche, which is now Ensemble, this party is caught in the middle, but they're losing support. Well, Macron called another election for parliament in the middle of the term just last year, and I covered that. You can go back and follow that on the podcast. And it was also somewhat inconclusive, but Ensemble and the far left worked together strategically to keep Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party from gaining seats. So they kept the far right at bay. There was a good chance the far right was going to come close to a majority. Even at their best polls, they probably would not have won a majority, but they were going to get close to it, right? Which would have been seen as a win nonetheless. So now what's going to happen? Did they hold another election? I don't know that another election is going to be more conclusive. Also, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the far left, could abandon their strategic deal with Ensemble. And instead of working together to keep the right-wing party from gaining seats, the left might just say, hey, forget Ensemble. It's between us and the National Rally, right? Either vote for us or the far right will win. Now, that wasn't an election strategy that would have worked the last go-round because Ensemble was still very large and powerful. But now that Ensemble is much weaker, I think Mélenchon could go for that. And if that's the case, then Ensemble is going to, collapse and National Rally, unless the voters change their minds, but Ensemble is going to collapse, and RN, National Rally, and Mélenchon's far left party, coalition of parties, are going to end up winning. So, one of them will get closer to a majority, and basically Macron's party will be crushed. Macron is termed out in 2027, so we already know at that point it's going to be, probably, left or right there. So, like I said, it's going to be the far left and the far right duking it out, right? Now, Marine Le Pen has got some court cases going on, and they're trying to keep her off the ballot for the next presidential election. She's already run twice and lost. There's some talk that maybe it's time for someone else. Well, the French have Jordan Bardella, and Bardella is the new leader of National Rally, and he's trying to take it in a more mainstream direction. Now, more mainstream coming from the far right is, a complicated thing. It's still very nationalist. When I call the RN far right, that's not like, over here where everybody's far right. If you're anywhere left of the far left, or anywhere right of the far left, you're far right, right? It's not the same thing. These really are very right wing relative to French politics, very far right people, as are, Mélenchon very far left. When it comes to foreign policy, though, both parties are less pro-Ukraine than Macron. So France has a chance to wield very significant influence. They have a chance to be a real player in Europe. They are by far the strongest military power in Europe. They have the only effective expeditionary military in Europe right now. The British are, and Poland is building up their military. In a couple of years here, Poland will have the most powerful force, save for the expeditionary part. Poland still won't have an expeditionary force. Theirs is defensive, right? Their military is designed to prevent Poland's conquest by Russia. But, they could conquer some of the surrounding territory, maybe Belarus or the Russian enclave in Kaliningrad, formerly Königsberg. But, they'd be hard-pressed to get as far as Moscow, and they're right there on, they have a land border, right? They can go overland. A real expeditionary military is still a little out of reach for Poland, but they may get there. In any case, France has that ability. If France wanted to, they could send troops to Ukraine now. They have an expeditionary force and the capabilities to do that. So it's really frustrating watching them, commit political suicide at this point. So could the French have found a better time for this? Anyway, we'll see what happens. Maybe they'll call a new election. I really don't see how that benefits Macron at all. Could he try to form a coalition between Ensemble and the far right? In theory. Now remember that Ensemble is made up of the left. So Macron was running kind of center left last go round, but once he defeated the Socialist Party in 2017, a lot of the former Socialist Party members joined Ensemble. So Ensemble is not a far-right party. It's not a right-wing party. It's a center-left party. And center is dubious term there. A lot of Ensemble's members are sort of institutional left, right? Could they work with the far right? These are people who wouldn't even shake hands with a far-right member of parliament. I had that video going around. So it is not inconceivable. We use some, very double negative, and we're going to get into some political talk here, that perhaps Macron could sit down and have lunch with Bardella, break out some good wine, get out some crepes, have some good croissant, and say, hey, buddy, why don't we find a way to get along? Why don't we, and see if he could get the far right to moderate enough that he could put a coalition together. At this point, the coalition just broke down with the far left, and Ensemble has a lot more in common with them. The far left is too far to the left, ergo the collapse of the coalition. But, at least they're on the same side of the ideological spectrum. Seeing Ensemble and the far right come together, imagine the Democrats and the Libertarians, climbing into bed with one another. That's a bad example because Libertarians are not far right like RN is far right. They believe it's small government, not government powerful enough, say, to deport illegals and deport migrants. But still, anyway. Okay, you get my point. Well, we'll see. Germany, Deutschland. What's going on in Deutschland? We have New elections called. Obviously, Olaf Scholz's government fell apart. I talked about that in previous episodes, and it was cracking and peeling, and then, just as America had elections, the coalition cracked like an egg. So now they have new elections coming in January, right? And there have been changes of leadership in the major parties. I've got some polls for you and some, discussion of what's going on. I think the biggest thing that has changed is that Friedrich Merz has become the leader of the CDU. Now, I talked about him a little bit last time. He was Angela Merkel's competitor back in the day when Gerhard Schröder was still Bundeskanzler. And now she beat him out then, and he left politics and went into business. Now he's back, and while he's very old, he can lead the party going forward. And the saddest thing in all of this, the part that aches, my heart and my soul aches, if Merz had beaten Merkel back in the day, and they'd had 16 years of him as Bundeskanzler instead of Angela Merkel, Germany would be in so much better shape. They wouldn't have sold out to the Russians. They wouldn't have allowed 1 million Syrian immigrants to come in, migrants, they're like illegals, but Europe made them legal. Anyway, that have caused, vastly increased crime and problems in Germany. So many things in Germany would be better if Merz had taken over instead of Merkel. Well, maybe he has a chance, he has time to try to rectify some of these things now. Merz, for those who are wondering, is more pro-Ukrainian, pro-Europe. He is for a strong stance against Russia, so that's good. Olaf Scholz has been a weak liver. He's been wishy-washy. He's, talking about how we're gonna do so many great things for Ukraine, and then they do some things, but not enough. For example, Merz has said that he would send the Taurus missiles that Ukraine has asked for many times from Germany to Ukraine that they could use to bombard Russia. And that would be very helpful. In any case, more support for Ukraine would be beneficial. So CDU is now more on the right track. They're more popular. They're getting their voters back. They're gaining popularity. The SPD, still led by Olaf Scholz. Scholz is, he's not the greatest leader, but he's kind of the best they have. They don't have a lot of political talent in SPD. It's been in decline for a number of years. And some of their better leaders in the past few years have sacrificed their political career for the unity governments, which are probably likely to continue. Little hint at what's to come here in my analysis. Okay, so other parties. Some of the left-wing protest parties are going away. I want to cover them before I get to the more exciting stuff. Die Linke, which is kind of a left-wing protest of SPD, they're polling down at 3%. You have to clear a 5% threshold to get seats in the Bundestag, right? Not like Israel where it's 3.25%, right? So at this point, Die Linke polling at 3-4%, they're done. They're going to be out of the parliament, and there are several other political parties that are just vanishing. The traditional parties, so let's go through it. CDU is polling right now in the range of 31 to 32%. Some polls have them as high as 33. That's pretty good for Germany. The larger parties don't tend to get much more than a third, but sometimes they've gotten as high as 45%. So Merz has his work cut out for him to convince voters to come over to him. I'll talk about why that's so low, given the situation the right is in right now, in a minute. SPD is polling down at 16, 17%. That's very low for SPD. They have become a second party, a distant second party, distinctly behind, polling at about half of where CDU is at. So there they are. I mean, they used to be a very powerful party. Gerhard Schröder was the leader, was SPD, he was Bundeskanzler between Helmut Kohl CDU, and Angela Merkel, also CDU, from 1998 to 2005. They had early elections in 2005, a year early because of Schroeder's problems. Now, Schroeder has gone on to be on the board of Gazprom and to be a Russian agent, so that's not so good. Unfortunately, Angela Merkel also sold out to Russia, shut down Germany's nuclear plants, started doing all this green stuff, which meant that Germany was heavily reliant on gas. Where are they getting their gas from? Russia. Vladimir Putin, Vlad the Impaler. Okay, so those are the two main parties. Grüne, which is also in the coalition. For those of you in Rio Linda, Grüne means green in German. They are the Green Party, and you can just refer to them as Grüne. Annalena Baerbock is still their leader. And they're polling at 11.5% to 12%. Some polls have them as high as 14, a little bit of an outlier. So the left is kind of moving away from SPD to the green left. Now, the green left in Germany is not quite as nutty as they are here. They're still nutty. From an American point of view, I can't help it. Friends, we're Americans and we're opinionated. And I'm a Jew. I've got two opinions here. So, I have to say something. So Grün is, they're fully on board with the green agenda, but they're a little more nationalist, very anti-Russia. And I joked, before that, who would have thought that German nationalism would return in the form of the green movement, the environmentalist movement. So they're very environmental, but they've also recognized that business can be greener, and so they're not as leftist, not as socialist as they could be. The FDP, Freie Demokratik, they are the pro-business free market party, polling at 4.5. Now, I don't have to tell you, my friends, that is below the threshold. So FDP and Christian Lindner are going to have to struggle to remain relevant and to get back into the Bundestag. And Die Linke is low. The only left-wing party that may pull above the threshold is BSW. So that's, Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance. And it's a, Russophile, right? Pro-Russian, basically, socially conservative, leftist party. You can't make this stuff up, my friends. Populist leftist party. It's Eurosceptic. So like they're anti-Europe, they're pro-Russia, and they're anti-green. So I mean, I guess if that's your protest, basically they're competing with the far right in East Germany. The former DDR, we said GDR back in our day, but it's Deutsche Demokratische Republik, the DDR. Those areas are still very left. And while Berlin has a lot of people who moved back into Berlin, there was also West Berlin, which remained. But Berlin has become more metropolitan and much more like SPD and that kind of thing. But if you look at the surrounding Länder, the surrounding states, the people who remain there, because a lot of them moved west, are leaning between populist right and populist left. Coming to the populist right here in a second. So a lot of these people are like, this is a populist left that's competing with a far left that's competing with the far right in the former DDR. Like I said, my imagination really isn't that good. I could not have made this up if I wanted to. It is so difficult when a country is split, like Germany was, to bring it back together. I will tell you, some people may disagree with me on this. Italy has been a country since 1867, right? And in 1871, in the wake of the Franco-Prussian War, they got Rome back, and that's kind of their official unification. But the country was there, sans Rome, which was protected by France, up until, for 4 years beforehand. Today, Italy is not quite one country, right? And I've talked to a number of Italians and they agree with me, so I'm going to go ahead and say this because, I'm sitting here from, the U.S. and I'm studying Italian history. But basically, Milan, Firenze, Venezia, these places up in the north, these are kind of one country, and the south, Campania, Bali, the boot, Napoli, Rome, to a certain extent, kind of in the middle of that, that's almost its own country. It's very different. It's not as pro-business. It's not as prosperous. Sicily is kind of its own thing too, sort of like the South, but they're kind of also their own thing. And Sicily has been its own kingdom for a number of years, so in the past. So Italy has not quite melded into a single country. They're doing okay, but a lot of the political chaos in Italy is because of that. Germany is trying to meld back into a country. And while it's exciting that they came back together, that was only 33 years ago, right? Germany has only a short time been back together, right? And after the traumatic event of being, bombed flat in the Second World War. Okay, so there we are. All right, I promised to talk about right-wing populism, and I have right-wing populism aplenty for you, because there's Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, the far-right party that people talk about. It is anti-migrant, pro-Russia, anti-Europe. They are the populist right that I was talking about. So BSW, that party is competing with AfD in the former DDR. Right. So AfD is very popular there, and it's popular with a certain segment of Germans elsewhere. They have promised that if they came to power, they would withdraw from the EU, end German support for Ukraine, and they would get rid of the migrants, and they're going to do, they're going to purify German society, and they're going to make Germany great again. Ich liebe Deutschland, Sieg, Heil. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe that went a little too far. So a lot of people are making the comparison. They seem awfully tyrannical, and I've talked about their members in the past. Kind of, well, being a member of the SS doesn't automatically make you a war criminal. Not something a German politician really should be talking about. Not really something they should be saying. I don't know. I mean, I'm sitting over here as a Yid, and I'm kind of like, say what now? The SS is this institution that murdered 6 million of my co-religionists, co-nationalists as Jews, right? Oh my God. And while it is true at the last minute, a handful of young people were force recruited into the SS and this sort of thing. The fact is, the people who voluntarily joined the SS from Germany, from Norway, from Croatia, from all of these other places, including Ukraine. Yes, there were Ukrainians who joined the SS. These people were criminals, right? They worked for Himmler, Heinrich Himmler, one of the greatest criminals in history. Himmler and Beria, the two great henchmen, the thugs, right? Hitler's thug, and Beria, of course, was Stalin's thug. Terrible, terrible men. Okay. The point is, just wow. Right. This is not really a direction Germany needs to be going right now. I understand people wanting to be patriotic. I understand that kind of thing, but this is very dangerous stuff. So that said, they are polling between 17 and 19%. There's one poll that has them at 20%. So they're polling pretty high. Peter Zion said that, be prepared for more populism. Oh my God, there's going to be so much populism. Well, he wasn't lying. We've just talked about the populist right and the populist left in France. Well, we've got the populist right and a little bit of a populist left in Germany. Deutschland. Wow. It's nutters for nutters' sake. So BSW and AfD are, together, depending on which poll you're looking at, let's just say between 22 and 27% of the electorate, right? So a quarter of Germans are ready to vote for these pro-Russian people. And we just saw what happened in Slovakia, where, they elected Fico, this pro-Russian nutter there. Hungary already has a pro-Russian nutter in Viktor Orban, whom I've been generous to on this podcast. I was a little chill about Hungary, and people always going after, Hungary and Poland are becoming dictatorships. Like, no, Poland has a right-wing government. Yes, people want to be conservative and explore being Catholic. I mean, Poland has barely existed. I've talked about this before anyway. Okay, the Poles have a right to live how they want to live. They voted for their, for their leadership, and Duda and his government are, leading the way that the Polish people want, obviously because they keep winning elections. Okay, so what's going to happen here? The most likely scenario is that FDP doesn't clear the threshold. And with AfD, BSW in there, That's going to be, there's going to be a lot of nutters in the Bundestag. And Grüne is going to be, if they're polling at 11, 12%, they're not going to have enough votes to form a government with with CDU, right? And if FDP does clear the threshold, right? I mean, if they manage to get 5%, then, with Grün, they'd have maybe 17% working together. Depending on how many votes CDU gets, the three of them could theoretically squeak into a coalition. This would become the so-called Jamaican coalition because, they're the color code, right? The CDU is represented by the color black, Grüne by green, and FDP by yellow. Black, green, and yellow are the colors of the Jamaican flag, right? They did the traffic light coalition when they had green, yellow, and red with SPD. That's not impossible that the Jamaican coalition could have enough votes to form a government. It is unlikely. At this point, what we're really looking at is most likely CDU and SPD forming some kind of unity government. Now, even so, there are a couple of polls here where they're beneath a majority. I mean, there's one that has the two of them together at 48. The next one is, they're at 49% of the vote. Now, Germany has a proportional system, but it's not quite a proportional system. They do have half the seats in the Bundestag that are what are called mandates, single-member elective districts, just like we are familiar with. Just that, the parties win those, and then they get the rest of their seats proportionate. So if you win a third of the seats and you've won some mandates, you keep the mandates, but then you only get enough, you only get more seats up to your total proportion. But if FDP doesn't clear the threshold, Die Linke doesn't clear the threshold, maybe BSW doesn't clear the threshold, who knows? That will change the proportionality, who gets what seats. So it's entirely possible SPD and CDU could squeak into having a majority together and form a unity government between the two major right and left parties and continue forward. That's most likely the outcome. If they're not able to have to form a government with one another and FDP doesn't enter the parliament, because if FDP clears the threshold, then SPD, CDU, and FDP could theoretically form a, black, red, and yellow coalition. What are we going to call that? Black and yellow you could call the banana coalition. I mean, a rotten banana is a little bit black and a little bit yellow, right? But what are you going to call it when you have red, black, and yellow? I don't know, the WASP coalition? I don't know. Anyway, so there are some red wasps out there. I don't want to meet them. I'd really rather never see them and never know they exist. I see them from time to time. So, but yeah, that's going to be interesting. So Germany is a mess. Romania, real quick here, Romania had an election. And this is kind of interesting. Romania had an election, the first round of the presidential election, and this guy Georgescu won. And this guy is like a real nutter. He's like flat earth, conspiracy theories left and right. There's no war in Ukraine. It's all made up. Wow, pro-Russian. This guy is a real nutter. Now, he's pro-Israel. We appreciate that. That's a good thing. But he's a nut. And they had their election, and he went to the runoff. And it's just like, we've seen time and time again that that the Russians interfere in elections, right? And they do this in a number of ways. So in the U.S., people are Russian interference helped Donald Trump. Not really. People will say 50,000 people were influenced and that changed the election in 2016. No. People voted for Trump for many reasons, but not because the Russians told them to. The Russians had no impact on whether Donald Trump was elected. He was elected because people here are tired of the political establishment. The left just underestimated how vile they are, how much they're hated, right? Okay. So anyway, this case, this is different. They really had some very, very severe election interference from Russia. Thousands of people, paid to vote, all kinds of misinformation out there, these kinds of things. So as a result, they have, the Supreme Court there has annulled the election. They're going to have a new election, and they're going to have to find a way to make it more secure. So what do you what do you do there? I don't know. That's how's the next election going to come out? So in the first round of this last election, the top two candidates that came out of it were not traditional candidates. You had Georgescu, who's this nutter from the far right, and the candidate who was second place and had a really good shot at winning, some polls put her ahead, was Elena Lasconi. She's mayor of a city in Romania and a former journalist. She's a known liberal, pro-business. She's invested a lot in developing the economy in her community. And so, I was really hoping she would come out winning. But since the first round has been annulled, they're going to have a do-over. And it'd be interesting to see how that's going to change. We'll see what happens. Just had to mention it because that is pretty crazy, right? So, wow, what a set of events we've had around the world. So much has changed since analyzing the presidential election and all the things in the world. I've a lot more stuff to talk about, but I don't want to spend all year recording here. I think I've gone long enough as it is. There's going to be more to say, right? There's going to be more stuff coming on. So stay tuned. Be ready for the next episode when it drops, and I'm going to try to get them out more often, I promise. I'm going to get you one more before the year is out, and then I'll talk to you next year. All right. With that, I will say, sort of as always, my goodbyes. Tekimas, bistan, shus, ciao, goodbye, and lehitrot.
Writers of the history, stand with me. Look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes by. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. Living in a fantasy, ecstasy, everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes away. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious Bashar and Macron אין אותי מיום ליום כולם ילדים טובים אחד אחד Bring them back home now